In the middle of recording Islands in the Stream, Kenny Rogers stopped the session and told the producer he wasn't sure the song was working. What happened in the next 30 minutes decided whether the song would ever be finished. It was 1983, inside a Nashville recording studio that had, over the previous several years, become one of the facilities where the sound of mainstream country was being made. Not the twangy, fiddle-heavy sound of an earlier era, but the cleaner, more polished crossover sound that had been expanding country's audience steadily through the late 1970s and into the new decade. Kenny Rogers had recorded in rooms like this many times. By 1983, he was one of the biggest-selling artists in the country, period. Not just in country music, but in any format, any genre, any category the record industry used to measure these things. And yet, sitting in that studio on this particular afternoon, he had a problem. The song on the table was Islands in the Stream, a composition by the Bee Gees, originally written and recorded in a very different style that had found its way to Kenny through the connections and conversations that determined what songs reached which artists in that era. Barry Gibb had written it. Kenny had heard it. Something in the song had felt to him like it could become something it wasn't yet. A country record, or something close to country, something that fit the kind of storytelling approach he'd spent years building his reputation on. The idea of recording it as a duet with Dolly Parton had emerged from conversations between Kenny, his team, and the record label. Conversations in which the logic was compelling on paper. Two of the biggest names in country music sharing a song written by one of pop music's most successful composers. It was the kind of collaboration that looked like a guaranteed success before a single note was recorded. Which is part of what made the moment when Kenny stopped the session so unexpected. Dolly Parton had arrived at the studio that day with the particular combination of professionalism and warmth that everyone who worked with her during this period described as her defining quality. Prepared, focused, and immediately at ease, in a way that made everyone else in the room feel more at ease too. She had reviewed the material. She knew what the song was supposed to do. And for the first portion of the session, the recording had been moving forward the way sessions are supposed to move. Efficiently, with energy, the musicians finding their groove, the technical elements coming together. And then Kenny stopped. What triggered it wasn't a single moment of failure. Nothing had gone wrong, technically. The takes they had were clean. The performances were strong. But somewhere in the process of listening back to what they had recorded, Kenny had begun to feel something that experienced performers sometimes feel when a recording is technically correct, but emotionally incomplete. The sense that the song was doing what it was supposed to do without yet doing what it needed to do. It was working as a recording. He wasn't sure it was working as a song. Not yet. Not in the deeper sense that distinguished a record people would listen to once from a record people would carry with them for years. He said so, quietly, without any particular drama, but clearly, the way someone speaks when they've decided that honesty is more useful than momentum. He told the producer he wasn't sure it was there yet, that something was missing, though he couldn't immediately say what. The room absorbed this. These moments happen in recording sessions. Every experienced musician and producer knows them, but they are never comfortable. There's a particular tension in a studio when an artist stops forward motion, especially when the forward motion has been good. Stopping costs time. Stopping costs money. And stopping when two major artists have cleared their schedules for a session has implications that go beyond the technical. Dolly Parton listened to Kenny say this, and then she did something that, by accounts of those present, changed the direction of the next 30 minutes completely. She didn't argue. She didn't reassure him that the takes were fine, that the recording was good, that he was overthinking it. She didn't look to the producer for support or use the professional language that people use in studios to smooth over moments of creative doubt. Instead, she asked him a question. She asked him what he heard when he listened to the playback. Not what was wrong with it, but what he actually heard, not as a technical assessment, as a listener. It was a small question, but it shifted the frame of the conversation from problem-solving, which is a specific, somewhat closed kind of thinking, to description, which is more open and which has a way of revealing things that problem-solving misses. Kenny started to answer, and in the process of answering, he found the thing he hadn't been able to name. What he heard when he listened to the playback was two excellent singers performing an excellent song. What he wasn't hearing was the specific thing that a duet could do that a solo performance couldn't. The sense that the two voices weren't just harmonizing, but actually listening to each other, responding to each other, the way people do in a real conversation rather than a coordinated performance. The song was about two people who had found each other. The recording, in the takes they had, sounded like two people who were both singing about that feeling rather than two people who were actually in it. Once he said this, Dolly understood immediately, and the producer, who had been listening, understood too. What followed wasn't a technical adjustment. It wasn't a change in tempo or arrangement or microphone placement. It was something simpler and more fundamental. They went back to the top of the song and recorded it again, this time with both artists specifically listening to each other in real time rather than performing to a track. Small things changed. The timing shifted slightly, the way timing shifts when two people are genuinely responding to each other rather than following a predetermined path. There were moments where one vocal waited for the other to land before coming in. Gaps that hadn't existed in the earlier takes. Spaces that made the conversation between the two voices audible in a way it hadn't been before. The new takes were different. Not dramatically different. A casual listener, comparing the earlier and later recordings, might have struggled to identify precisely what had changed. But in the control room, listening back, the difference was immediately clear. The song now sounded like the two people in it actually knew each other, actually cared about each other, actually meant what the lyrics said they meant. The technical quality was the same. Everything else was better. Islands in the Stream was released later that year and became one of the biggest hits of either artist's career, the biggest duet either of them had ever recorded. A song that reached #1 on the country charts and crossed over onto pop radio in a way that very few country recordings did in that era. It became, almost immediately, the kind of song that audiences associated not just with the artists who sang it, but with specific moments in their own lives, weddings, anniversaries, the particular emotional register of two people who had found their way to each other and wanted a song that said so. For Kenny Rogers, the willingness to stop and say, "I don't think it's there yet," was consistent with how he had always approached the music that mattered most to him. Not as a product to be completed efficiently, but as something that had to actually work, had to actually be what it claimed to be before it was done. For Dolly Parton, The session was a reminder of something she had always believed about collaboration, that the best thing you could do for a partner in a creative moment was not to make the problem easier, but to ask the question that helped them find the answer themselves. She had asked Kenny what he heard, not what was wrong. The distinction mattered. One question closes down, the other opens up. And in a recording studio in Nashville in 1983, one small question opened up the song that millions of people would carry for the rest of their lives.